The decline and resurgence of Byzantium, a phoenix rising from the ashes. Imagine an empire that once ruled the known world, its legions marching from the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Germania, its culture shaping the very fabric of Western civilization. Now, picture that same empire centuries later, battered and bruised, its territories shrinking, its enemies closing in from all sides. This was the Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as Byzantium, in the early Middle Ages. For centuries, historians have painted Byzantium as the sick man of the medieval world, a once great power in terminal decline. But is this the full story? The truth is far more complex. While Byzantium faced immense challenges, it was also a civilization of remarkable resilience. In the 9th and 10th centuries, a series of extraordinary leaders emerged, men who not only halted the empire's decline, but also spearheaded a dramatic resurgence. This is the story of how Byzantium rose from the ashes, and at the heart of this tale is a man who would become one of the empire's greatest generals, Nikephoros Phocas. The pale death of the Saracens. But before we dive into the life and campaigns of Nikephoros, we must first understand the world he inherited, a world of chaos, invasion, and seemingly insurmountable odds. This is the story of Byzantium's darkest hour and the dawn of its revival. By the year 800 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire was a shadow of its former self. The glory days of Justinian the Great, who had briefly restored the Mediterranean to Roman control, were long gone. The empire's territories had shrunk dramatically, and its enemies were everywhere. To the west, the Lombards had pushed the Byzantines to the fringes of Italy. To the north, the Slavs and Bulgars had overrun much of the Balkans. And to the east, the rise of Islam in the 7th century had permanently deprived Byzantium of its richest provinces, Egypt, Syria, and North Africa. The loss of these territories was a devastating blow. Egypt, in particular, had been the breadbasket of the empire, supplying Constantinople with the grain it needed to feed its massive population. Without Egypt, Byzantium was forced to rely on its remaining territories in Anatolia and the Balkans, which were under constant threat from invaders. But perhaps the greatest threat to Byzantium came from the sea. The Muslim Arabs, once confined to the deserts of Arabia, had become formidable naval powers. In 827, the Byzantines suffered two major blows. The Aghlabid Emirate of Tunisia launched an invasion of Sicily, beginning an 80-year conquest of the island. Meanwhile, a group of Andalusian exiles seized Crete, establishing the Islamic Emirate of Crete. This emirate, supported by the Abbasid Caliphate, became a base for Arab pirates who launched devastating raids on Byzantine coastal towns. By the early 9th century, Byzantium appeared to be on the brink of collapse. Its territories were shrinking, its enemies were growing stronger, and its economy was in shambles. But amidst this turmoil, a new dynasty would rise to power, a dynasty that would lay the foundations for a Byzantine resurgence. In 811, a peasant boy named Basil was born in the theme of Macedonia. His story is one of the most remarkable in Byzantine history, a classic rags-to-riches tale. As a young man, Basil worked as a stable boy for a relative of Emperor Michael III. His strength and skill with horses caught the attention of the emperor, and he quickly rose through the ranks of the Byzantine court. In 866, Basil became emperor alongside Michael III, and a year later, he orchestrated Michael's assassination, seizing the throne for himself. Basil I's reign marked the beginning of the Macedonian dynasty, which would rule Byzantium for over 200 years. His reign was one of the most successful in Byzantine history. He oversaw the Christianization of the Balkans, forging alliances with the Bulgars and South Slavs and bringing them into the Eastern Orthodox fold. He also launched campaigns against Arab pirates in the Adriatic, seizing the city of Bari and establishing Byzantine suzerainty over the Lombard Principality of Benevento. But perhaps Basil's greatest achievement was his military reforms. He reorganized the Byzantine army, creating a more professional and effective fighting force. He also strengthened the empire's navy, which had been neglected for decades. These reforms would prove crucial in the years to come, as Byzantium faced new threats from both the east and the west. By the time of his death in 886, Basil had laid the foundations for a Byzantine resurgence, but the years following his death would test the empire's resilience once again. The death of Basil I marked the beginning of a new era of challenges for Byzantium. In the north, the Bulgarian prince Simeon launched a series of wars against the empire, expanding his realm at Byzantium's expense. Simeon was a formidable opponent, and his campaigns brought him to the gates of Constantinople itself. Although he was never able to capture the city, he forced the Byzantines to pay tribute and recognize him as Caesar, or Tsar, a title that would later be adopted by the rulers of Russia. Simeon's death in 927 brought some stability to the northern frontier, but the eastern frontier remained volatile. The Abbasid Caliphate, though weakened, still posed a threat, and Muslim pirates continued to raid Byzantine territories from their base in Crete. The Byzantines launched several campaigns to retake the island, but all ended in failure. However, the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate in the 10th century created an opportunity for Byzantium. The Islamic world was increasingly fragmented, with regional dynasties like the Hamdanids of Aleppo and the Fatimids of Egypt asserting their independence. This political climate set the stage for the rise of Nikephoros Phocas, a general who would lead Byzantium to one of its greatest military victories, the reconquest of Crete. Nikephoros Phocas was born in 912 into the noble Phocas family, a prominent military dynasty in Cappadocia. From a young age, Nikephoros was steeped in the traditions of Byzantine warfare. His family had long served as commanders in the Byzantine army, and Nikephoros was determined to continue this legacy. He quickly gained the favor of Emperor Constantine VII, who recognized his potential and appointed him as the military governor of the theme of Anatolikon. By 945, Nikephoros had proven himself as a capable commander, leading successful campaigns against the Hamdanids of Aleppo. His capture of the strategic fortress town of Hadath in 957 was a significant victory, demonstrating his tactical brilliance and earning him the position of domestic of the schools, the highest military office in the Byzantine Empire. But Nikephoros' greatest challenge lay ahead. In 959, Romanos II ascended to the Byzantine throne. Unlike his predecessors, Romanos was more interested in indulging his pleasures than in governing the empire. He delegated military matters to his generals, and Nikephoros was given command of the eastern armies with the task of retaking Crete. The early 9th century was a period of decline for Byzantium, but it was also a time of resilience and resurgence. The rise of the Macedonian dynasty under Basil I and the fragmentation of the Islamic world created the conditions for a Byzantine comeback. In the next episode, we will delve into the life and campaigns of Nikephoros Phocas, the pale death of the Saracens, and explore how he turned the tide of history in Byzantium's favor. The rise of Nikephoros Phocas, the pale death of the Saracens. Imagine a world where an empire, once the undisputed master of the Mediterranean, is now a shadow of its former glory. Its enemies are at the gates, its territories are shrinking, and its people are losing hope. This was the reality for the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, in the early 10th century. But just when it seemed that all was lost, a new hero emerged from the ashes of decline, a man whose military genius and unyielding determination would turn the tide of history. His name was Nikephoros Phocas, and he would come to be known as the Pale Death of the Saracens. This is the story of Nikephoros Phocas, a man who rose from the ranks of the Byzantine nobility to become one of the greatest generals in the empire's history. It is a story of triumph and tragedy, of brilliant victories and bitter betrayals. But above all, it is a story of resilience, a testament to the enduring spirit of Byzantium. Nikephoros Phocas was born in 912 into the noble Phocas family, a prominent military dynasty in Cappadocia. From a young age, Nikephoros was steeped in the traditions of Byzantine warfare. His family had long served as commanders in the Byzantine army, and Nikephoros was determined to continue this legacy. He was raised on tales of heroism and sacrifice, of battles won and lost, and of the glory of the Roman Empire. As a young man, Nikephoros quickly gained a reputation for his skill in combat and his strategic mind. He was tall and strong, with a commanding presence that inspired loyalty among his troops. But it was not just his physical abilities that set him apart, it was his intellect. Nikephoros was a student of history and military theory, and he understood the importance of strategy and logistics in warfare. By the time he reached adulthood, Nikephoros had already distinguished himself in battle. He fought in several campaigns against the Hamdanids of Aleppo, a powerful Muslim dynasty that posed a constant threat to Byzantium's eastern frontier. His success on the battlefield caught the attention of Emperor Constantine VII, who recognized his potential and appointed him as the military governor of the theme of Anatolikon. While Nikephoros was making a name for himself in Anatolia, the Byzantine Empire faced a growing threat in the Mediterranean, the Emirate of Crete. The island of Crete, seized by Andalusian exiles in 827, had become a base for Arab pirates who launched devastating raids on Byzantine coastal towns. For over a century, the Byzantines had tried and failed to retake the island. The fortress of Chandax, with its imposing walls and strategic location, was considered impregnable. But by the mid-10th century, the situation had changed. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had once supported the Emirate of Crete, was in decline. The Hamdanids of Aleppo, who might have offered support, were preoccupied with their own conflicts. This created an opportunity for Byzantium to strike. For Nicephorus Phocas, the reconquest of Crete was more than just a military objective. It was a chance to restore Byzantine pride and secure the empire's future. He knew that retaking the island would not be easy, but he was determined to succeed where others had failed. In 959, Romanos II ascended to the Byzantine throne. Unlike his predecessors, Romanos was more interested in indulging his pleasures than in governing the empire. He delegated military matters to his generals, and Nicephorus was given command of the eastern armies with the task of retaking Crete. Nicephorus began preparations for the invasion in early 960. He assembled a massive force of 30,000 to 50,000 men, including thematic soldiers from across the empire and a contingent of Norse mercenaries. The fleet consisted of 100 Droman warships, 200 Calendia transport ships, and 308 supply vessels. This was one of the largest military expeditions of the medieval period, a testament to the importance Byzantium placed on retaking Crete. But assembling such a force was no easy task. The logistics alone were staggering. The Byzantine Empire had to mobilize resources from across its territories, from the wheat fields of Anatolia to the shipyards of Constantinople. Every detail had to be planned meticulously, from the provisioning of troops to the construction of siege engines. Nicephorus was deeply involved in every aspect of the preparations. He inspected the troops, reviewed the plans, and even oversaw the construction of the fleet. His attention to detail and his ability to inspire his men were key to the success of the expedition. The invasion force landed on northern Crete on July 13, 960. According to contemporary chroniclers, the Byzantine army was met with little resistance, though some accounts suggest a large force of Cretan Muslims confronted them on the shore. Regardless, Nicephorus quickly organized his troops and launched a decisive attack, driving the defenders back into the fortress of Chandax. The initial victory was a morale boost for the Byzantines, but the real challenge lay ahead. Chandax was a formidable fortress, protected by towering walls and deep moats. Nicephorus knew that a direct assault would be costly, so he settled in for a siege, surrounding the fortress and blockading it by sea. The siege of Chandax would be a test of endurance for both sides. The Byzantines had to contend with the harsh conditions of the Cretan countryside, while the defenders of Chandax faced the constant threat of starvation. Both sides knew that the outcome of the siege would determine the fate of Crete, and perhaps the future of the Byzantine Empire. Nicephorus was a master of siege warfare. He ordered the construction of fortified stockades around the walls of Chandax, cutting off the defenders from the outside world. He also deployed siege engines, including catapults and battering rams, to weaken the fortress's defenses. But the defenders of Chandax were equally determined. They launched frequent sorties, attempting to disrupt the Byzantine siege works and keep their enemies off bounds. The siege dragged on for months, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. But Nicephorus was patient. He knew that time was on his side. The defenders of Chandax were running out of food and supplies, while the Byzantines could rely on their fleet to bring in reinforcements and provisions. The turning point in the siege came when Nicephorus learned of a large Arab relief force gathering in the hinterlands. Guided by local Christians, he led a surprise attack on the Arab camp, annihilating the relief force and eliminating the threat from the countryside. With the hinterlands secured, Nicephorus could focus all his efforts on Chandax. After months of siege, the defenders of Chandax were on the brink of collapse. Nicephorus, sensing their desperation, launched a final assault. Using a combination of siege engines, battering rams, and sappers, the Byzantines breached the walls of Chandax on March 7, 961. The fortress fell, and the Byzantine army poured in, slaughtering the defenders and reclaiming Crete for the empire. The reconquest of Crete was a major victory for Byzantium, ending over a century of Arab piracy in the Aegean. For Nicephorus Phocas, it was the crowning achievement of his military career. But his work was far from done. In the next episode, we will explore Nicephorus' campaigns in Anatolia and Syria, and how he earned his grim moniker, the Pale Death of the Saracens. The Siege of Chandax, a test of endurance and strategy. Imagine a fortress so formidable that it was considered impregnable. Its walls, towering and thick, were reinforced with a mixture of earth, goat hair, and pig hair, compressed to withstand even the most relentless assaults. Its location, perched on the coast of Crete, made it a perfect stronghold for Arab pirates who had terrorized the Byzantine Empire for over a century. This was Chandax, the capital of the Islamic Emirate of Crete, and it was the last obstacle standing between Nikephoros' focus and the reconquest of the island. The Siege of Chandax was not just a military campaign. It was a test of endurance, strategy, and willpower. For the Byzantines, capturing Chandax was essential to ending the threat of Arab piracy in the Aegean. For the Muslim defenders, it was a matter of survival. This is the story of one of the most dramatic sieges in Byzantine history, a story of triumph and tragedy, of brilliant tactics and brutal warfare. When Nikephoros' focus and his Byzantine army arrived at the walls of Chandax in the summer of 960, they knew that a direct assault would be suicidal. The fortress was too well defended, its walls too high, and its moats too deep. Instead, Nikephoros opted for a siege, surrounding the fortress and cutting off its supply lines. The Byzantine navy blockaded the harbor, preventing any reinforcements or supplies from reaching the defenders. But the siege was not without its challenges. The Cretan countryside was hostile territory, and Arab guerrillas launched frequent raids on the Byzantine camp. These raids were not just a nuisance, they were a serious threat to the Byzantine supply lines. In one such raid, a Byzantine scouting party was ambushed, resulting in heavy casualties. The leader of the scouting party, a strategos named Nikephoros Pastilis, was struck down by a hail of arrows, and only a few survivors managed to escape back to the siege camp. Nikephoros' focus responded to these challenges with brutal efficiency. He ordered his troops to burn villages and slaughter civilians in an attempt to crush the resistance. This scorched earth policy was controversial, even by the standards of medieval warfare, but it was effective. The Arab guerrillas, deprived of local support, were forced to retreat into the hills. The turning point in the siege came when Nikephoros learned of a large Arab relief force gathering in the hinterlands. This force, numbering around 40,000 men, was preparing to launch a coordinated attack on the Byzantine siege camp. If successful, it could break the siege and force the Byzantines to retreat. But Nikephoros was not one to wait for his enemies to strike. Guided by local Christians, he led a surprise attack on the Arab camp, annihilating the relief force and eliminating the threat from the countryside. This victory was a major morale boost for the Byzantines and a devastating blow to the defenders of Chandax. With the hinterlands secured, Nikephoros could focus all his efforts on the fortress. After months of siege, the defenders of Chandax were running out of food and supplies. The winter of 960 to 961 was particularly harsh, and the bitter cold took a heavy toll on both sides. The Byzantines, too, were suffering. Morale was low, and supplies were running short. But in mid-February, a fleet arrived from Constantinople with much-needed provisions, reinvigorating the Byzantine army. Nikephoros knew that the time had come for a final assault. He ordered a barrage of siege engines to rain hell upon the walls of Chandax, but the fortress held firm. Undeterred, Nikephoros launched a frontal assault on the main gates, using battering rams to break through the defenses. But this was just a distraction. The real plan was far more cunning. Nikephoros had ordered a contingent of sappers to dig tunnels beneath the walls of Chandax. These tunnels were designed to undermine the foundations of the fortress, causing the walls to collapse. On March 7, 961, the plan succeeded. A section of the walls gave way, and the Byzantine army poured into the fortress. The defenders of Chandax fought bravely, but they were no match for the Byzantine onslaught. Men, women, and children were slaughtered indiscriminately. The fortress fell, and with it, the Emirate of Crete. After nearly 150 years, the Byzantine eagle once again flew over the island. The reconquest of Crete was a major victory for Byzantium. It ended over a century of Arab piracy in the Aegean and restored Byzantine control over a strategically vital island. For Nikephoros' focus, it was the crowning achievement of his military career. But his work was far from done. In the years that followed, he would lead campaigns in Anatolia and Syria, earning his grim moniker, the Pale Death of the Saracens. The Pale Death of the Saracens Nikephoros Phoca's Eastern campaigns. The fall of Chandax in 961 was a monumental victory for Byzantium, but for Nikephoros Phoca's, it was only the beginning. With Crete secured, Nikephoros turned his attention to the eastern frontier, where the Hamdanids of Aleppo and other Islamic dynasties posed a constant threat to Byzantine interests. This was a region of immense strategic importance, a land of ancient cities, fertile plains, and rugged mountains. It was also a region steeped in history, where the legions of Rome had once marched and where the armies of Islam now held sway. This is the story of Nikephoros Phoca's Eastern campaigns, a story of brilliant victories, bitter betrayals, and the relentless pursuit of glory. It is a story that would earn Nikephoros the grim moniker of Pale Death of the Saracens and cement his place in history as one of Byzantium's greatest generals. The eastern frontier of the Byzantine Empire was a volatile region, constantly shifting between Byzantine and Islamic control. For centuries, the Abbasid Caliphate had been Byzantium's greatest rival, but by the mid-10th century, the Caliphate was in decline. Its once mighty empire had fragmented into smaller, competing dynasties, each vying for power and influence. Among these dynasties, the Hamdanids of Aleppo were the most formidable. Under the leadership of Saif al-Dawla, the Hamdanids had carved out a powerful emirate in northern Syria, becoming a major threat to Byzantine interests in the region. Saif al-Dawla was a skilled warrior and a charismatic leader, and his raids into Byzantine territory had earned him a fearsome reputation. For Nikephoros Phoca's, the eastern frontier was both a challenge and an opportunity. The decline of the Abbasid Caliphate had created a power vacuum, and Nikephoros was determined to exploit it. His goal was not just to defend Byzantine territory, but to expand it, reclaiming lands that had been lost to Islam centuries earlier. Before turning his attention to Syria, Nikephoros first had to secure Byzantium's eastern frontier in Anatolia. This was a region of strategic importance, serving as a buffer zone between the Byzantine heartland and the Islamic world. It was also a region of great cultural and economic significance, home to some of the empire's most prosperous cities. Nikephoros' campaigns in Anatolia were marked by a series of brilliant victories. He captured key fortresses, pushed back the Hamdanids, and secured the eastern frontier. His use of combined arms tactics, including heavy cavalry, infantry, and siege engines, made him one of the most effective commanders of his time. He also demonstrated a keen understanding of logistics, ensuring that his troops were well supplied and well prepared for battle. One of Nikephoros' most significant victories in Anatolia was the capture of the strategic fortress town of Hadith in 957. This victory not only demonstrated his tactical brilliance, but also earned him the position of domestic of the schools, the highest military office in the Byzantine Empire. It was a position that would give him the authority and resources he needed to launch his campaigns in Syria. In 962, Nikephoros turned his attention to Syria, launching a campaign against the Hamdanid Emirate of Aleppo. The city of Aleppo was one of the most important centers of Islamic power in the region, and its capture would be a major blow to the Hamdanids. The siege of Aleppo was a masterstroke of strategy. Nikephoros surrounded the city, cutting off its supply lines and isolating it from the outside world. He then launched a series of coordinated attacks, using siege engines to weaken the city's defenses and heavy cavalry to break through its gates. The defenders of Aleppo fought bravely, but they were no match for the Byzantine onslaught. The city fell, and Nikephoros' troops poured in, looting and pillaging as they went. The fall of Aleppo sent shockwaves throughout the Islamic world, and Nikephoros' reputation as the Pale Death of the Saracens was cemented. The fall of Aleppo was a major victory for Byzantium, but it was not the end of Nikephoros' campaigns. In the years that followed, he continued to push back the Hamdanids, capturing key cities and fortresses and expanding Byzantine territory in the region. His campaigns in Syria and Anatolia not only restored Byzantine power, that also demonstrated the empire's ability to adapt and overcome. But Nikephoros' success also made him a target. In 969, he was assassinated in a palace coup, a tragic end for one of Byzantium's greatest generals. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy will endure long after his death, inspiring future generations of Byzantine leaders. The Pale Death of the Saracens in historical context. The eastern campaigns of Nikephoros Phoca's were a pivotal moment in Byzantine history. They marked the beginning of a new era of Byzantine resurgence, one that would see the empire reclaim its position as a major power in the Mediterranean. For Nikephoros, they were the culmination of a career that had earned him the title of Pale Death of the Saracens, but his story was far from over. In the next episode, we will explore the final years of Nikephoros' life, his tragic assassination, and the legacy he left behind.